My father pretended he didn't know me in public until his biggest client introduced me as his boss. So my dad left when I was 15. No big fight or anything. He just packed his stuff one Wednesday while I was at school and was gone by the time I got home. My mom picked up a second job, and I started bussing tables at a diner on weekends to help with rent. We never heard from him again. No calls, no birthday cards, nothing. I found out through my cousin years later that he moved about 40 minutes away, started a new life, and had 2 more kids. That stung, but I got through it. I put myself through school, got a degree in business operations, and spent 6 years working my way up at a commercial equipment company. By 28, I was the regional procurement manager. I approved every vendor contract in our area and had 12 people under me. I earned all of it. Then about 6 months ago, I ran into my dad at a grocery store. I was in the produce section, and he was right there by the apples. I knew it was him the second I saw him. He looked older, but he had the same walk and the same way he tilted his head when he was reading something. I stopped because I did not know what to do. He looked up. Direct eye contact. He held it for 2 full seconds. Then he looked away, grabbed a bag of apples, and pushed his cart right past me like I was just another person in the aisle. His cart almost touched mine. I stood there waiting for a nod or a wave or even a fake smile. Nothing. He just left. I sat in my car for a while after that. Told my mom that night and she shook her head and said that tracks. I tried to let it go. 3 weeks later, I had a meeting with one of our vendors. This company called Ridley & Sons had been supplying us for about 2 years. Their sales rep Doug was solid, always on time, easy to work with. He asked if his boss could sit in because they wanted to pitch expanding the contract. I said sure. Day of the meeting, Doug walked into the conference room with his boss. It was my dad. He came in smiling with his hand out for a handshake. The second he saw me, the hand dropped and the smile was gone. Doug had no clue what was happening. He just pointed at me and said, "This is my boss. She handles all the vendor contracts for this region." My dad sat down and did not say a word for 5 minutes. Doug kept looking at him to jump in, and he just stared at the table. I ran the meeting like any other, asked about capacity, pricing, delivery windows, directed everything at Doug since my dad was not going to talk. Near the end, my dad finally spoke up and told Doug they could offer a longer deal at a better rate. He said it to Doug, not to me, like I was not the one deciding. After the meeting, Doug stepped out and my dad stayed behind. He said he had no idea I worked here. I said okay. He said I looked good and he was happy I was doing well. I said thank you. Then he asked if we could grab coffee sometime and talk. I told him this was a professional setting and I preferred to keep it that way. He nodded and left. 2 days later, he called my office directly. My assistant put him through because she did not know who he was. He opened with the contract, but within a minute he was asking about my mom, where I lived, if I was seeing anyone. I ended the call. A week later, Doug told me his boss wanted to personally take over our account. Said his boss thought a closer relationship would help them keep our business. I told Doug I preferred working with him and saw no reason to change. My dad then showed up at our office without an appointment. Told the front desk he needed to see me about contract revisions. I had my assistant say I was booked. He sat in our lobby for 3 hours before he left. That night, my cousin called and said he had been asking the family for my personal number. He told her leaving was the biggest regret of his life. She asked if I wanted his number. I said no. Over the next month, he kept showing up with samples nobody asked for and quotes he could have emailed. Every visit, he asked my assistant if I had 5 minutes. I never did. Then he crossed a line. I found out Monday morning when Lillian told me my father showed up at my apartment building the night before, claiming a family emergency to get past the doorman. The doorman didn't buy it and called my cell. I told him to deny access completely. My father sat in the lobby for 2 hours checking his phone and watching the elevator doors before finally leaving around 11. This was different from showing up at my office. He found out where I lived and tried to force his way in with a fake emergency. I emailed Victor about a vendor conflict of interest involving Ridley & Sons, explaining that the owner was my biological father, who abandoned our family 13 years ago and had been using the business connection to attempt personal contact I'd declined multiple times. Victor had me bring documentation to his office that afternoon. I handed him a printed timeline of every phone call, every office visit, every time my father showed up somewhere he shouldn't have been. Victor said this was exactly what their policies were designed to address and asked if I could continue managing the account fairly. I told him the truth. I couldn't be fair about it anymore. He reassigned the account immediately and told me to keep documenting everything. 2 days later, Victor called to say my father had contacted him directly, spending 10 minutes complaining I was being unprofessional and letting personal issues affect business decisions. Victor shut it down and told my father to stop using vendor relationships to pursue personal contact. The man who pretended I didn't exist in a grocery store was now harassing my boss. That evening, my mother called shaky-voiced to say my father showed up at her house that afternoon. Every question he asked was about me. Was I happy? Was I seeing anyone? Did I talk about him? She told him she wasn't giving him information and he needed to leave. I called my cousin, who I suspected had given him the address. She hesitated just long enough that I knew the answer before she said yes. She said he seemed so sincere about wanting to make amends and she thought she was helping. I told her she violated my trust and put my mother in danger. She got defensive and said danger was dramatic. I said showing up at someone's house unannounced after 13 years of silence was not normal normal behavior. I told her if she gave him one more piece of information about us, I would stop talking to her too. She argued that he was still family, and maybe I was being too hard on him. I said fine, and hung up feeling angry and betrayed that my own cousin was feeding him information and acting like I was the problem. The next week, during a contract review meeting, the receptionist knocked to say someone in the lobby insisted he needed to see me about an urgent vendor issue. I told her to have security escort him out. Lillian texted later that he made a scene, shouting about being treated like a criminal when he just wanted to talk to his own daughter. Multiple employees heard it. Rhett from security showed me the footage. My father's body language got aggressive when confronted. He pointed at the elevators, pulled out his phone like he was going to call someone, then yelled something at reception before finally leaving. I authorized a trespassing warning. That night, my mother called crying. She got a letter from him about how proud he was of everything I accomplished, how he knew he didn't deserve forgiveness, but was dying inside not being able to know me, how he thought about me every day, and regretted leaving more than anything. Parts of it almost got to her. The words sounded genuine and painful. Then she stopped herself and remembered something important. He had 13 years to send a letter like this. 13 years to say he was proud or sorry, or that he thought about me. He only wrote it now because I had something he wanted, because I was in a position of power over his business, and his attempts to use that access weren't working. She said it was manipulation, dressed up as regret. Her clarity cut through everything. She was right. If he actually cared, he would have tried years ago when I was bussing tables at a diner trying to help her pay rent. He didn't want a relationship. He wanted access. The contract renewal for Ridley and Sons came up 2 weeks later. I wasn't involved anymore, but heard through office gossip they weren't getting renewed. Doug called, sounding defeated, saying the business was in trouble. I told him the decision was out of my hands. 2 days later, a huge flower arrangement arrived at my desk, with a card saying he'd stop trying to contact me if that's what I really wanted. I threw the flowers in the trash and kept the card for documentation. Melissa from HR reviewed everything I'd been tracking and said she was impressed with my documentation, but concerned about the escalation pattern. A week later, my mother told me my father's wife had called her. The wife just found out he had a whole previous family. He told his second family his first marriage ended before I was born. My mother told her the real story, and the wife started crying. His lies were catching up with him. Everything he built on false stories was crumbling. 2 months passed with no contact, and I started to relax. Then I got a certified letter from an attorney representing my father requesting a meeting to discuss his desire for a relationship, offering mediation services. I found a family law attorney, brought all my documentation, and she drafted a formal cease and desist stating I didn't want contact now or in the future, and that his recent behavior reinforced my decision. It cost $800, and the finality felt worth every cent. His attorney responded 3 weeks later confirming his client would respect my wishes. Then my mother forwarded a Facebook message where he told her he was moving to another state for a fresh start and hoped someday I'd understand he was trying to fix his biggest mistake. She asked if I wanted to respond. I typed back one word: no. That weekend at my mother's house, we looked through old photo albums. She pointed out photos where he was standing apart from us, looking away from the camera. She said he was never fully present even when he lived with us. That helped me see the grocery store moment more clearly. It wasn't who he became. It was who he always was. I just finally had proof. Monday morning, Victor called me into his office and told me the company was promoting me to senior procurement director with expanded regional authority. He said my handling of the vendor conflict demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment and professionalism they wanted in leadership. The promotion came with a significant raise and my own team. I accepted immediately. I turned a messy personal situation into proof of my capabilities. I didn't let my father derail me, and now I was moving up because of it. 3 months passed without a word. My cousin called and told me he moved to Arizona, started a consulting business, and his second wife was seeing a counselor with him because the truth about his first family caused problems. His other kids felt lied to. I listened and felt mostly neutral. His life was his problem now. I took my mother to dinner at a nice restaurant downtown. She raised her glass and said I built a life on my own terms. She told me she worried for years that his abandonment broke something in me, but watching me handle this showed her I was stronger than either of them. We talked about her maybe retiring early now that I could help her financially. She got emotional, and I squeezed her hand and told her we both earned this. 6 months after everything started, I was training my new team. One of them asked how I got to senior director so young. I gave the professional answer, but privately thought about how refusing to let my father derail me was part of that success. I built this career without him and protected it from him when he tried to use it for his own purposes. Lillian brought my mail that afternoon. Normal work correspondence, contracts to review, meeting invitations, nothing from my father, no flowers or letters or contact attempts. I realized I hadn't thought about him in days. When I did think about him now, it was without the sharp pain it used to carry. He was just someone I used to know who made bad choices. I was someone who made better ones. That was enough closure for me.